All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Vocation Station Week 2. We wanted to record this week's lesson so that everybody had access to it. And so my name is Sam, and this is Margaret. And we are two occupational therapy students from Temple University, if you have not met us yet. So we are just going to go ahead and do this week's lesson, and I'm going to start sharing my screen.
All right, so this week we're going to be talking about resume building, and as we just mentioned, I'm Margaret and this is Sam. So go ahead, next slide.
There we go. All right, so as we begin today, we just want to start off our session with a little activity just to feel out where we are. So we're going to do a grounding exercise that is very brief, but will just prepare us to start learning a little bit today. So this is called the hand sensing exercise. So I want everyone to close their eyes where you are, or look down if that is more comfortable. And I want you to hold out your hand kind of right in front of you and allow yourself to move your fingers around and feel your hand. And now ask yourself, without touching anything and without moving your hand anymore and without looking at your hand, how can you know that your hand is still there? If you pay attention, you realize that you can feel the inside of your hand, or a subtle sense of warmth or tingling. Maybe it's tight or cold. And that is it. So now hold out your other hand with your eyes closed and allow yourself to feel your hand. Ask yourself again, without touching anything and without moving your hand and without looking at your hand, how do you know that your hand is still there? Pay close attention again, and you realize you can still feel the inside of your hand. Go ahead and squeeze both hands really, really tight for another 3 seconds. And go ahead and release them gently. All right, so that's just a little exercise that you can use with any body part. You can use it with your toes, your knees, your face, but we just wanted to get you grounded as we move on here. So thank you for participating.
So we're going to talk about resumes today. If you want to take a few seconds to jot down what you know about resumes, or what you're hoping to learn about resumes, just for your own personal reference. Okay, next slide.
All right. Here we go. All right, so what is a resume and why is it important? So a resume is really a snapshot of you. It highlights your strengths, your skills, your assets, and your interests. We talked a little bit about that last week. And it also lists your experience, it lists your education, certifications, things that you might have become skilled in. So not only is it a list of these things, but it's also a chance to make a first impression. So it often has a little bit of a personality touch to it. It really is a marketing tool to kind of showcase yourself and why you are an asset to an employer. It's also often a step to an interview, and it is often or almost always a requirement.
We thought that this quote was a good representation of kind of how meaningful resumes are. So to succeed in today's job market, you have to think of your resume as an advertisement targeted towards your future boss.
On. Okay. So these are some hidden messages that are found within our resumes. So if our resume is neat and it's well organized, it is free of error, and it looks professional, that says something about you. It says that you are neat. It says that you are well organized, that you have good attention to detail, and that you are careful and competent. So it's important that we, make sure that our resume looks like we have put in time and effort to making sure that it is professional. Okay.
So this is kind of just a little check-in or sort of little pop quiz on some common resume facts. So the first question is, the length of a resume should be how long? Again, you can just kind of jot it down on your piece of paper there. Second question is, an employer takes this long to review an applicant's resume. And then the last one is, the most important part of a resume is blank.
You got your answers? Here we go. Let's see.
All right, so you might be surprised to hear that the length of a resume should be 1 page long. An employer takes less than 1 minute to review an applicant's resume. And lastly, the most important part of a resume is the experience section.
Wonderful. So when you see that fact that an employer takes less than 1 minute, to review a resume, that's pretty powerful, and it says a lot about how we have to be a little bit strategic the way that we design and present ourselves in our resume. So what are the parts of a resume? That is going to be our next slide. So there's sections to a resume. You have the header at the very top. Then you typically have an education section. You typically have an experience section. And then you have a section to highlight your skills, and also a section to talk about activities and things that you're involved in that demonstrate your interests. And that's a lot of times where some of your personality comes through. So let's go and talk piece by piece.
Okay, so first section, the header. This part's pretty important because this is the first part that the reader is going to see. And it should include your name, your address, your email address, a telephone number, and it's all going to be located as it sounds at the top of the page. And then there's usually going to be a line or a border of some sort separating it from the rest of the resume.
So here is an example of a header. As you can see, Susie Q student's name is very obvious and centered. You have the address there, you have the phone number and the email. The email should be a professional email, and it's best if it includes your first and your last name. So here we have 2 examples, and I'll throw myself under the bus here. Margaret.Bondovich@temple.edu, as opposed to my personal email right now, which looks like TUF94997. I'm sure you can see the difference. An employer wants to be able to say, I can look at this email address and I know who it is. I know exactly who I'm emailing right now. So it's important that when we are ready to put our email on a resume, it looks a little more like Margaret's. And again, making sure that this is very visually underwhelming, and that you can identify quickly whose resume this is, and find the pertinent information, the pertinent contact information very quickly.
Okay, so the next section is the education section. where you're going to list the highest level of education. And then under that, so let's say you have some college, and then under that, you can list your high school education, or maybe your high school education is at the top of the list. But underneath each section, it's going to have the name of the institution, its location, your highest degree earned, the year of your graduation. You can include the GPA if you'd like to. That's kind of an optional portion. And then lastly, you're going to want to include any honors or awards or anything that kind of stands out from that part of your education.
Okay. So here we have experience. So experience kind of captures a lot of things. And oftentimes we always say, oh, jobs are looking for people with experience, but I don't have experience yet. And don't be discouraged, because you probably have a lot more experience than you think. So it's just a matter of giving ourselves credit for some of these things. So what is considered experience? Of course, you're going to think full and part-time jobs are experience, but also self-employment. This can include, self-run businesses and marketing products on your own, or it can be, something like childcare or house care, or other self-employment opportunities. Something that often gets forgotten about is volunteer work. So any community service that you partake in, whether it's official or unofficial, is something that you should include, because again, it shows, it's an opportunity to showcase some of your skill set, but also some of your interests and your values. Another thing that is considered experience is practicum or field work. So opportunities within your education that have required you to do something outside of the classroom, that might be preparing you for future employment. The next thing is paid or unpaid internships. So whether or not you have volunteered or putting yourself out there to work for a company or an organization free of work, or you are getting paid for it, those are still valuable experiences as well. And then let's not forget about extracurricular activities. So whether you were in clubs, or you were in sports, or you were on leadership committees, all of these things are experience that you want to make sure you don't forget about, because you do have experience. And then some information to include is the job title or the title of experience. So whether or not it's cashier or a store manager, or it's head of marketing, you have the title.
You could also just put something like volunteer.
Volunteer. Yep. Something that captures that position very quickly. And then you would want to include the dates. You would want to include, so you would want to say, from 2016 to present, or from 2016 to 2017, and also include the dates in there if you know them, or the months in there. And then the name of the organization or company, if that applies. You want to say where you did that. So if you did something out in Ohio, you would want to know that. Responsibilities and some of the tasks that you perform. These are all things that we'll include, and we'll show you how to include that.
Okay, so last week we touched upon skills, and just a quick review. When it comes to jobs and work resumes, skills are kind of divided into two sections. So we have the soft skills, which are kind of your people skills, your interpersonal skills, things you learn in everyday life and can continue to improve upon. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have your hard skills, which are concrete skills. They're teachable skills, and they're skills that are directly related to a job or a task. So you're going to want to include those on your resume. You'll also want to include responsibilities. So those are the specific tasks and duties you were or are responsible at previous employment. Sam, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, so in the responsibilities, you want to talk about, what exactly occupied your time or occupies your time at your job? What exactly occupies or occupied your time when volunteering, and what exactly were you doing when involved in extracurricular activities? So I'm going to show you on the next slide exactly what that might look like and how we can, list our experiences, but then share our skills and responsibilities in a quick, brief description underneath of them. I think this next slide is just here for, we'll skip over this, but this is a slide that just, if you are looking for ways to describe your skills, these are just some categories which you can, even just Google analytical skills and find lists and ways to describe your skills. But this is, this next slide is an example of how to more clearly talk about them. So how to highlight your skills and responsibilities. So as you can see in this example, the experience is enterprise rent-a-car. And their first bullet point says assisted customers. So that's kind of their two action words. What did you do? Oh, I assisted customers with what? Car rental procedures. So that's saying something about procedures. Paperwork, insurance issues, explaining company policies. So right there, this person can work with paperwork. This person is organized. This person understands insurance and policies. So there's a bunch of skills captured right there. And you want to do that with all of your experiences as concisely as you can. So to make it concise, you use bullet points. You start each line with an action verb. And then if you're currently employed, so if this is, right now this example says this job was over in 2009. So they're going to use assisted. Rather, if it was today, they would say assists customers if you were still active in that job. You want to tailor your skills and experiences to the position you are applying for. So if this person is specifically applying for another insurance job, of course they are going to talk about paperwork and insurance and policies. But if this person was applying to maybe more of a customer service job, they might highlight problem solving, conflict resolution, customer service. And you also want to make sure that you're not exceeding 3 bullet points because you'll find that your resume can get very lengthy. So we'll keep it brief.
Okay, so you're also going to want to include a section on your activities and your interests. I think as Sam mentioned earlier, this is really kind of where your personality can shine through on the resume. And it says that in the first bullet point right there. So you're also going to want to choose unique hobbies that show you're a good fit for the job. So you can kind of think about what would be a good thing to highlight about yourself that would relate to the position that you're applying for. That also is going to be something that is going to make you stand out, and the person hiring or reviewing the resume is really going to remember about you personally. And then lastly, I kind of just mentioned this, but just choosing hobbies that emphasize your skills is going to be important, because that's just going to be one more step that's going to show that you're qualified and a good fit for that position.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that this image on the bottom captures that pretty well. But if you ever find yourself running out of room on your resume and you want to find ways to include some of these activities and hobbies, feel free to meet us for an individual session, and we can find ways to include those personality pieces and highlight those interests within the rest of your content too. It is a little bit of a puzzle piece, so we're happy to make sure you feel like your resume is personable and reflects you. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about are do's and don'ts of resumes. So maybe I'll talk about some do's, and Margaret, if you want to talk about some don'ts, and maybe we can explain a little bit as we go. So you want to use action verbs. And as you saw in a few slides ago, we talked about assists customers or manages accounts. You want to make sure that that first word says exactly what you do. It might not capture everything that job entailed, but that first word should kind of be very concrete. And the reason is employers read this in 1 minute. So you have to make sure that they quickly are understanding what you do. You want to make it short and concise for the same reasons. You want to make sure that it's about a page long. Try to keep it to a page is probably the best. And you always want to have someone constantly looking over it, have multiple people look over it. We can look over it. And you want to make sure that it's easy to read, easy to flow and scan. And what we mean by that is that part of a resume is the visual part. It's the first way that an employer processes what's in front of them. So you want to make sure that the cleanliness is prioritized and that we're not using all different fonts and we're not using bold here and underline there and italicize here to the extent that it's messy. So having a lot of eyes look at it and give a lot of having people give feedback about what they experience looking at that at the first glance is really important. So all good things to do.
Kind of having like a consistency throughout and not having tons of different sizes of the fonts as well.
Yeah, right on. Yep.
So a couple don'ts for resumes. Well, one of the reasons why you're proofreading it so many times is to avoid typos and grammatical errors. I know it is helpful to have fresh eyes on it, so having someone else take a look is very helpful. You also don't want to have include pronouns such as I, me, my, etc. If you can avoid those, it definitely makes the resume seem more professional, and that's like a good thing to avoid. We kind of touched upon this just a second ago, but you don't want there to be clutter. So you want it to be visually appealing and just kind of well laid out without too many extraneous things. You also want to keep it nice and formal. So don't use any humor or say anything controversial. You don't really want to include any sort of political views in it. And then lastly, you do not want to include any personal references.
Right. The next slide is just a couple considerations, really just food for thought, and might get us thinking about some things. Just some keywords that, on average, people are looking for: problem solving. People are looking for leadership. They're looking for your communication abilities. So these are things just to consider highlighting that really are embedded within any experience you have, and you can definitely pull it out if you just kind of tease it out. And some other things that managers are looking for: relevant experience. So if I'm applying for, let's go back to the insurance example. If I'm applying for an insurance company, I might want to have some insurance experience. But what this left corner is saying, it's saying that these are the skills that you might need. So if I don't have an experience in insurance, I can still say, well, I do have experience problem solving, and I do have experience reading written language and interpreting, documents. So those are all things that, you want to pull out so that you can back up why you think you're a good fit.
Can I jump in real quick?
Yeah.
I just had one comment that's really important, is that you do want to make sure that you're honest on your resume. So it's really important that you don't exaggerate your skills or your experience. So I would probably put that under the don't list. So don't make up facts about yourself or don't over exaggerate. But I think it fits nicely on this slide as well, because if you don't have what you were just saying, what Sam was just saying, if you don't have that specific experience, you can talk about things that you do have that still make you a candidate for the job.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up, because we don't want to make things up so that we look like we have experience in that field, because it's okay that you don't, and it actually might make you more valuable. So great point. All right, let's move on to cover letters.
Another important partner to the resume. So the cover letter is kind of what the hiring manager or whoever's reviewing your resume is going to see first. It is typically a one-page written document summarizing your interest in a specific position. As I just mentioned, it is more often than not paired with a resume. A lot of the times you're going to be electronically submitting a resume, so you'll usually you'll attach the cover letter with the resume to the position you're applying for. And it really gives a good summary of why you're the best candidate for the job. So a couple things that it should include it should highlight your relevant experience. It's going to showcase your familiarity with the company and their goals. So it's pretty important to do a little bit of research so you kind of have an idea of the culture and kind of the ideals of the place that you're applying to. And lastly, you're going to want to make sure it has a professional demeanor with good grammar, and a little bit of your personality is okay to shine through in this document.
Yeah, and I just want to point out that in a cover letter, this is going to be more of an essay format, which is why that resume needs to be like tight and succinct and concise, because you will get the chance to, explain things in your cover letter. So it's kind of a nice pair.
Oh, and one last thing too, in the cover letter, you don't need to type out all of the content of your resume, because you are attaching the resume to the cover letter.
Spot on. Yep. Okay. So the purpose of a cover letter, it is to introduce yourself to a hiring manager. Again, so if we're submitting this electronically, you don't have that formal introduction where you're shaking someone's hand for the first time. This is your first impression. So it makes a strong case for why you are a good fit for this position. Take a moment to reflect on that, because you will not submit the same cover letter for every job. If you are putting out an application for 7 jobs and you're submitting a resume for 7 jobs, your resume is going to stay the same, but that cover letter has to be updated for every single position that you're applying for, because you're making the argument of why you should be hired by that specific employer.
That being said, if you're kind of thinking like, whoa, Sam, that sounds like a lot of work, you can kind of create a skeleton cover letter, but you do need to go in and update it for each job you apply to, which is not as hard as starting from scratch each time you're submitting a resume.
Yeah, perfect. Great suggestion. So it'll show your desire to work for the company, and it'll establish that you are someone that they would want to hire. And it also would fill in some missing data that you're not going to include in your resume. So maybe Margaret, you might have some examples of this, of things that you might include in your cover letter that wouldn't go on your resume. I don't know if maybe, family experience or, life experiences, life milestones.
Well, nothing specific is coming to mind right now, other than like we did talk about how a resume should only be 1 page. It's going to be very succinct and to the point. So the cover letter kind of gives you that like little bit of wiggle room to maybe include a little more detail about something that you're very proud about on your resume that you couldn't elaborate on. Or maybe you had like a specific experience that you could go into a little more detail about that as it pertains to the position you're applying for. So it kind of just gives you the forum to expand a little bit more and make it a little bit more personable.
Wonderful. Thank you. So here we go. What to include in your cover letter.
Okay, so you're going to want to include a header with your correct contact info. Oh, excuse me. So that's going to be the contact information of the person that you are addressing the letter to. And as I mentioned previously, you want this to be, professional, and so you're going to use professional language, and that's going to include addressing who you are writing the letter to. It's important to lost my train of thought. Oh, to try to address the actual person instead of using the terminology of to whom it may concern. So in the second paragraph, you're going to want to sell yourself as a candidate. So you'll talk about your previous job experience here, highlighting skills, abilities, and how you're going to meet the company's needs. And then in the third paragraph, you're going to talk about you and in the company's future. So this is really kind of the section where you would incorporate any sort of research or information you have about the company and kind of pairing your skills and how they're going to fit and with the company's values and align with their mission. So kind of like where you see yourself in the future with this company. And then lastly, you'll kind of round it out with a call to action. So tell them you're interested in being interviewed, that you'll follow up, you'll be in contact. You definitely want to thank them for taking the time to read your cover letter and your resume. And lastly, you're going to want to have the right level of assertiveness. So this is kind of a tricky balance to have between being assertive, but also being too pushy or too aggressive. So that is something that is kind of a skill that needs to be worked on. But there is a way to kind of balance those two.
Yeah, and maybe we can have an example of that. What comes to mind in my head is, I would be a great fit for this and you should really pick me. That is one side of it. But how about, I am really impressed by your company and think that I could provide value, and I am willing to, provide whatever, in words, but
how
something.
How about eager to be a part of it?
That's right. Yes. Instead of saying, I deserve this because, so those are you can see there's a little bit of a fine line there. So I hope those examples were helpful. All right, so this next slide is a couple of tips, well, a lot of tips. So we don't need to go super deep into them, but we'll just breeze through them. So things that you do want to do, you want to keep it short. Do not exceed that first page. You want to write a new cover letter, or as Margaret suggested, fill in the skeleton differently for each job so that it is personalized and tailored to them and shows that you've done your research for that specific site.
I feel like we kind of covered a lot of these already.
Okay, let's see. Yeah. Then why don't we can move on.
I think we can move on.
What about the don'ts? This I
yes,
I know
that's going to be similar to your resume. Don't use the I language too much, like I believe, I think, I feel.
Mm-hmm.
I also already mentioned don't repeat your entire resume, because that's what they're going to read your resume. They're going to read your resume. And then lastly, don't mention any other jobs you're applying for. You want it to seem like all of your focus and all of your energy is on this particular job.
Spot on. Great. Awesome. All right. So that pretty much takes us to the end of this week's session. So I hope that this slide leaves you a little bit empowered, and you do have this and you have the experience. It's a matter of shaping it and putting it on paper. So just know that we are here to help you. We are more than happy, regardless of what week it is, to set up individual sessions to work on this with you. So please do not be afraid to reach out to us. We will be here for you. Margaret, I don't know if you have any other closing thoughts.
Oh no, just thank you for attending, or thank you for listening to what we have to say. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, everyone.